I'm Venus with Galaxy Inc. And for this week's writing tips, we're going to be talking about research. Now, you'll notice I told you last week I'd been sick. I got sick again. Apparently it's some kind of secondary infection. So pardon my voice. It's a little scraggly today, and I will be cutting the video every time I cough. But other than that, we are going to delve right into what research is. And the reason I thought we'd talk about this is because I actually read on Reddit recently where somebody had asked, do they have to do research in fantasy books? Like, what's the point of doing research if it's your own world? And so I want to talk a little bit about research in fantasy and then just research in general. And first of all, with fantasy, yes, you do need to do some research, depending on how realistic you want your story to be. So for example, I wrote a fantasy novel. I had to have characters who travel long distances, but I needed them to get there fairly quickly and quicker than the other character they were chasing after. Okay, so there's some nuance here, right? We've got a character who's been taken. They are a day's ride ahead. We've got other characters who now need to catch up with that character. They need to do it quickly. How do you do that? So the first thing I had to look up was, how far does a horse run? And that led me to the Pony Express and how far could those horses travel if you were switching out horses. And then I had to look up, were there systems in place in like medieval London or medieval England where a character could do that, because I do have a very high fantasy medieval like story. If I want this to be as realistic as possible, I need to make sure that my characters can get caught up. And how is that possible? What I determined was that my characters could not catch up unless my other characters stopped. And that these people, my characters, needed to not sleep as long at night in order to catch up, and the other characters needed to stay in place a little bit longer if I wanted that to happen, which I did. So eventually they do catch up with one another, just barely, just in time. I'm okay with the just-in-time thing. It still has a lot of, exciting elements, so it's okay. But that was a bit of research that I had to do. I also had to look up, how far does a crow fly and how fast? Because if you're sending crows or ravens as messengers, then you need to know how far they fly. Do they fly faster than pigeons? And if so, do I need to change it to pigeons in my story because I need them to fly faster than the horses? So it's a lot of these little things I don't know. Like, I don't know off the top of my head how fast a horse runs. I've ridden a horse like 5 times, and all of them have been rather slow. The one time a horse went too fast, I was just holding on for dear life. So don't really know how to ride horses, so I need to make sure that I had that information correct. I want the information correct also for anybody who's reading my story and says, that's impossible, a horse can't run that long. And they're right. A horse cannot gallop for more than about 1.5 miles. And so I had to change the way that I was going to tell my story because of that, because I needed to make sure that my characters and their horses got where they needed to go safely. Another thing that you might end up having to look up is geographies. There's a great website, which I will find the link for you. I have it on my computer. I will link it at the bottom of the video. But it's a great place to see how far it took to travel places in England. And that might help you if you're writing a fantasy story or a real life story to know how long it would take to travel by foot, by carriage, by horse. Those are all really important elements if you are writing a story. If you're writing sci-fi, it gets a little weirder, right? Because you can make it really hard sci-fi and try to add in these really complex ideas of, gravitational pools, shooting, helping things move faster or whatever, but you want to be really careful not to get bogged down in those details either, or the book just doesn't become fun. It just becomes lots of data. But you do need to do your research. Is it possible for this to happen? And if it's not, are you okay with breaking that rule? We don't think that we can travel faster than the speed of light. We'll see if that continues to be a thing, but so far, our knowledge says that we can't. So if you write a story where your characters travel past the speed of light, you're kind of breaking the idea of basic physics, but it's okay because it's a fictional story and you can do that. Now, as we go into more realistic fiction, that is where, yes, you need to do research. You need to do a lot of research. You need to do research about the time period that you're writing in if you're doing historical fiction. And remember, anything that is like, if you're writing for kids, anything that's older than them is historical fiction. So you need to make sure that you know your information, even if you grew up in that time period. You need to look up information. You need to look up clothing. You need to look up hairdos. I remember looking up, I was writing a book that was set in ancient Sumeria. And I was like, I don't know what these people wear. I don't even know. And, it's not like we have lots of writing, cuneiform writing and stuff, but we don't have tomes about fashion in ancient Sumeria. So I had to look at stonework and carvings to kind of get this idea, and then I had to make it my own. So I had to just kind of play around with what I knew. So in my mind, you can break the rules if you know them. If you want to introduce a character that everybody knows a lot about, so let's say that you want to make a fictional version of Benjamin Franklin and you want to introduce him when he was a kid, you need to do your research on Benjamin Franklin and everything that we know about when he was a kid, so that when you create your fictional version of him, he is as close as you can get while still making him your character. I will caution you about doing research when you're doing nonfiction, and I kind of feel like that's almost like a separate thing, because with nonfiction, like if you're writing biography, we don't want to put words into our characters' mouths. We can do that in fiction. We cannot do that in nonfiction. People used to do that. It used to be a really popular thing to do when you wrote in the 50s and 60s. I had this series of books called like True Values, and then one of them was about Louis Pasteur, and I always thought it was fantastic, but it kind of put words in the character's mouth that I don't know if he actually said all those things. I don't know. I don't think he actually did. Some of it had been fictionalized, but it was supposed to be nonfiction for kids. So that's where I kind of caution you. You can play around with, fiction, but with nonfiction, it's kind of its own beast. And we will talk one day about that. We'll have a separate video just about nonfiction and nonfiction research, because that involves some craziness. One question that I had somebody ask me, because I said a story in a place that I've never lived and never been, was, can I write a story that's in a place that I've never been? Yes, with a lot of research and interviews and questions. So I do have friends that live in this area, and so of California that I've been writing in. I wanted the story to be set in an area where water polo is actually a sport that is played in high schools. I live in the South. Nobody's playing water polo in North Carolina. I did, and I'll get into some more of the research as we go along, but I started out by learning about water polo by just watching videos on YouTube and learning the rules, the basic rules. I read like a kid's book about water polo too. Then I started looking around for places that actually have water polo, what colleges have them, because I have a character that I want to be recruited into a college team, and what high schools have them. Is it super popular, and where are those places at? And I chose a place where I actually did know somebody who had lived around there, so that I had somebody I could ask questions of. What the houses look like, what's the mentality, and she became a beta reader so that she could actually determine if that kind of gave the idea. I've been to California, I just not been to this specific place because of where the school is set that has water polo. My second part of research was I actually went to a real water polo game. I visited a local, I guess it's local, it's like an hour away, but a swim team that does it for fun, and there's a couple of teams that they'll play against, but it's all not recreational. So they were really good though. I really enjoyed it, and I sat through a whole game, and I was by myself with a piece of paper and pen, and I'm writing away, telling, just trying to get as much information as I could, and from what I could see from above. And then I interviewed two of the players to kind of ask them why they got into it, what it is that they love about it, what's the hard parts, what's the easy parts. That was really important. This is for a fictional story. I wanted to have as much information about this. On top of that, and this is kind of going backwards a little because I didn't mention it at the beginning, but when I decided to pick water polo, I picked a sport that I actually wanted to learn about. I'm not a sports person. I'm super geeky. And I thought, if I'm going to learn and write about a character playing a sport, I actually want to them to play a sport that I'd be interested in learning about, something that is unique and interesting and something that I don't mind going and watching, or watching things on YouTube. I really wanted to make sure that I picked something that I would enjoy. I did not want to learn about American football. No offense to fans who love football or soccer, any of the other sports that are out there. I did not want to write a whole book about a soccer player or a football player, and I did not want to write an entire book about baseball, even though that is actually a sport I know all the rules to because my brothers played when they were little. So that, I mean, that was why I picked that. The story that I had in my head didn't have a particular sport in mind. I just thought it was important that my character played one, and that was the one that I ended up choosing. But it did take a lot of research. It required going out in person and actually sitting down and interviewing people and stuff like that. You might have to do that if you are writing a story. I also wrote a story that is set in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which I used to live in Boston. And I sat in Harvard Square and I just wrote about what I was seeing, what I was listening to, what I was smelling. Really tried to get a real feel in a way that I didn't when I lived there. When I lived there, I was going places. I had ideas in mind of where I needed to be, but I needed my character to actually view it in a different way. One, from the eyes of a child, and two, from the eyes of somebody who sees this place all the time. So it needs to be old hat, and yet I'm having to describe it to readers. I thought it was important to have that moment. I also went to other areas where my story is set so that my characters, kind of have those moments. There are also parts of my research, because I have written about things in ancient, settings, that I can't go visit. So I'm stuck looking at maps online, and I'm stuck looking at archaeology videos and reading books about it. And I think research is an important component, and I think it's important to fantasy too, because we want our stories to be as realistic as possible. We don't want people just, as they're reading, to be pulled out of a story because you inserted something that there's no way that horse is going to run that far. And so I think it's a really important question that people are asking, and I think that this is the answer. The answer is yes, you need to do all the research that you possibly can. If you have a question about something, you need to answer the question and make sure that you either decide to go against it or at least insert that or intercalate it into your book. What I would caution you to not do is get bogged down by research. I love research. It's probably my favorite part of writing. And it's really easy to get bogged down in the details and want to have all of the information that you could possibly have all inserted into your head so that you can get it out on paper. But there is such thing as spending so much time researching that you don't actually write the book. If that does happen, I know people who've done it. You do not want to be that person. The goal is to finish a book. If you're starting to write and you want to write a book, the end goal is to finish it. If you've got a very heavy historical novel where you feel like you need a lot of that information kind of up front, do all that work up front, but give yourself a deadline. Don't let yourself just keep researching for 3 months or 6 months or a year. Give yourself a deadline of the amount of time and the amount of information you're willing to ingest, so then you can get your story started and get it out of your head and onto a piece of paper. And I will say this, that even if this is your first book, even if you've written 5 books, I know that people get kind of caught up in this stuff and they're not sure what to do. Sorry. I'm telling you. Even if you've written several books, you might be the kind of person who does get bogged down in a lot of research, and you're not really sure how to stop yourself from going and going and going and going. And I understand, because I'm a reader, so I'm constantly reading and reading and reading. And I think that, again, it just goes back to pulling out the relevant information that you need. Don't forget to press like and subscribe to our channel. We post new writing tips for all types of writers every Friday. I've been Venus with Galaxy Ink. I hope your writing is out of this world.